Thanks, everyone. I guess I'll stand over here. So my name's Matt. I work at Polygon. I'm on the institutional team, but don't get up and leave. Today is not a speech about real-world assets. I'm here to talk a little bit about Polygon and Cosmos and what we've built and how we can work together. So the first question when I wake up in the morning is, how did I get here? How did Polygon get to where it is today? How did Cosmos get to where it is today? And kind of how can we work together going forward? And when I practiced this speech with a bunch of my Cosmos friends, they all turned to me and said, we have no idea what you're talking about. So I'll take a step back and just briefly describe Polygon's history and architecture and how we got to where we are today. So Polygon's mission has always been about scaling Ethereum, right? And the first step we took toward that is our Polygon POS chain. It's loosely based on a modified version of Tendermint called Peppermint. And the whole goal was to kind of prove out product market fit for cheaper, faster, EVM-compatible block space. And it's been, broadly speaking, very successful. This is the chain where Reddit NFTs live, Trump NFTs live. We have lots of games, lots of social apps. But it's not really where we wanted to go, because a sidechain is just not that safe. And at the end of the day, you can call it a commit chain or a plasma chain or a sidechain or whatever you want, but it doesn't inherit the security of Ethereum, and it can never attract the liquidity of Ethereum for that reason. So what we've done is invested a ton of money, a ton of time, and a ton of blood, sweat, and tears into building out the best ZK tech possible. And so we've built our first ZK chain, the ZK EVM. And this is a full-on ZK rollup. So it uses Ethereum for data availability. It can touch Ethereum assets. And it serves as kind of like a bridge between Ethereum and more scalable block space. And as we built our first one of these, we thought, well, we could probably build another with a different virtual machine or with a different set of security assumptions. And as we started to build another, the sort of programmer's curse set in, and we said, maybe we can modularize this and have an ecosystem. And so that kind of brings us to where we are today, which is Polygon and Cosmos are working on a lot of the same problems. We have lots of different applications. At Polygon, we have 8 ZK Layer 2s in the making and dozens more on the horizon. And at Cosmos, there's who knows how many chains in the interchain. But we kind of wind up facing 2 of the same issues over and over again. And the first one is liquidity, right? As you have non-homogeneous block space, different trust assumptions, different users, different protocols, liquidity fragmentation becomes a real issue. And so we're all kind of working toward this, whether it's using standards like Noble, USDC, or different yield aggregators, optimizers, using certain zones as liquidity hubs. But at the end of the day, the user doesn't really want to rely on other people's chains to secure the liquidity. We want to make liquidity this sort of trustless, permissionless flow of assets across all block space. The second issue is that we have a fragmented ecosystem. And I think nowhere is this more true, honestly, than in Cosmos. Everybody's working on kind of their own thing, heads down building, and it becomes very difficult to keep track of what other people are working on and the best ways to work together. This is how you wind up with multiple competing standards for things like stablecoins, right? The developer experience gets fragmented. That can lead to security issues. The user experience gets fragmented. I have like 9 different wallets on my computer and my phone just to like play around with all the different apps. And so we kind of need to bring these 2 things together. So the first tool that we built is called Polygon CDK, Chain Development Kit. Stop me if this sounds familiar. It's an open source toolkit for building out layer 2. So you can think of it a lot like the Cosmos SDK, but specifically targeted at ZK-powered L2s. It's got a few components. So the first one is the prover, and this is really where like the heart of Polygon's tech investment and innovation has gone, is in making the most efficient, fast prover we possibly can. And we're pretty proud of where we've gotten it. Our next version of the prover, Plunky 3, is going to cost very small fractions of a penny to prove an individual transaction. We'll talk about the prover a little more later. We also have the virtual machine. So we started with the EVM, but we don't want to limit developers in our ecosystem to the EVM. Just because it's the dominant one today doesn't mean it's not going to be leapfrogged by something in the future. See this with x86 architecture and Apple Silicon, right? We don't want to be locked into any individual component. So that one's modularized too. We also have data availability, right? So for our ZK EVM, we use Ethereum for data availability. This is actually kind of a political thing in the Ethereum ecosystem, believe it or not. A lot of ETH developers are saying if you don't use Ethereum for data availability, it's not a true rollup. Some people say it's not a true layer 2. I think we don't really care as long as it inherits enough security for the individual use case. And then you have the sequencer, which generally looks pretty homogeneous across all the different L2 solutions. It listens for transactions, bundles them, and sends them to the data availability layer. But if you look at Cosmos, there's actually a lot of different ways to construct a block, right? You can have interesting things like arbitrage transactions at the end of a block that capture MEV and send it back to the user, or send it back to the liquidity provider, or the staker, or whatever. You can have Oracle transactions at the start of a block. I think that was one really great idea from Terra that we can all learn from a little bit. And so we don't want to limit the developer in terms of which sequencer they want to use either. But as we modularized this thing, we realized there were going to be a lot of layer 2s. And all of the same problems that affected us and Cosmos before are going to be compounded. So if you think about block space, and this is like kind of a foreign concept for Cosmos people, but in Ethereum, block space was always the scarce resource. Safe, trustable block space has always been like very hard to come by, and it's always been something you pay a premium for. But thanks to ZK Tech, we actually have really high quality safe block space available in a plentiful quantity. So then what becomes like the next constraining element? I would argue it's liquidity. You can't just copy paste liquidity, right? It's rehypothecation. I mean, FTX did this, and I guess they were very capital efficient, but we don't really want to repeat that. So the first thing is we need to find a way with a whole bunch of layer 2s in the world to communicate with each other and be able to bridge assets safely. And you might say, Matt, IBC solves this. And I would say, not exactly. Right? IBC does still involve trust assumptions, and as a bit of a purist, I want to trust as little as possible. So we'll come to that in a minute. The other thing that it needs to solve, though, is cost, right? So Ethereum is still kind of expensive. It's expensive for a reason, but when you have all these layer 2s submitting their proofs down to Ethereum one at a time, each of these costs today $50. That could be an order of magnitude more, if not even more than that. Like if we know one thing about Ethereum, it's that when there's high demand for block space, things don't scale, right? So we need to find a way to kind of drive these costs down. And that's where Polygon 2.0 really comes in. We have this aggregator layer where each of the L2s submits a ZK proof together, and then the aggregator bundles them all up using recursive ZK tech and submits a single proof down to the L1. So if right now it costs $50 for one chain to submit its proof down to the L1, and you split that by 2 or 3 or 4, you can make the cost substantially cheaper. And so we estimate that at full utilization, we'll take that $50 per proof down to about 10 cents, which means for a user, it's going to be really cheap and easy to bridge assets to and from the Ethereum L1. So that's like scalability of proof costs, right? But the proof is kind of a special thing. It allows for sort of safe, trustless communication across machines the same way that like cryptographic signatures do. With a cryptographic signature, I sign something, and you can verify that I own the private key for that wallet cheaply and easily, and it would be very difficult, if not impossible, for me to ever forge that. With a ZK proof, it's the same thing, but with a state transition, right? And when you have that kind of cross-machine communication out of the box, you can allow for safe bridging of assets. And so what we have is kind of a diagram here, but it's basically I take my bundle of transactions, and one of these includes a bridge transaction, right? I say, I want to bridge from chain A to chain B. That's a valid state transition, and I can prove it, and then chain B can see that and credit me with those assets. And so it kind of works across any number of systems super easily. So today, we've kind of implemented this, but it has to go through Ethereum, right? So we have chain 1. It bridges the assets down to Ethereum, back up to chain 2. This is a substantial improvement over optimistic rollups because that bridging down to Ethereum takes a few minutes instead of a few weeks or a few days, right? So this is definitely an improvement, but we think we can get it better. We think we can take this 30-minute cross-chain communication down to about 30 to 60 seconds with this interoperability layer. So just to give one more summary, all the chains submit their proofs to this interop layer. They get bundled and sent down to the L1. That saves costs. But because they're all submitting their proofs to this sort of common area that everyone can see this data, you can actually be a little bit more optimistic about it and say, well, I see a valid state transition. I see a proof that it's valid. I'm going to go ahead and credit those assets on my chain for this user. And what that gives you is the same sort of fungibility of assets across L2s that you get when you bridge from L2 to L1 back to another L2. And so you get canonical assets, right, which is really nice. And it's something that IBC has generally had a little bit of issues with. Obviously, there's sort of canonical pathways, but as a user, I really never want to think about how I got my tokens to where they are right now. I want every asset, regardless of what chain it's on, to be fungible with the other assets, right? And with ZK proofs, you can actually have that level of trust where you can cut the validator trust assumptions completely from the equation. So this brings me back to why am I here, right? Well, we're working with a few Cosmos projects, and the first one is Canto. So Canto is working on their real-world asset thing, and they want to get access to Ethereum liquidity. This can kind of give you a way to allow your users to bridge assets to and from Ethereum safely and easily, right? And this is just kind of the first step. So we started with Canto. It's EVM compatible. They're fun to work with, regardless of what you think of the chain. And it's a really good kind of blueprint for how we can help bring Ethereum liquidity into the Cosmos ecosystem. So Canto still has all their own validators, all their own staking tokens. They run block production however they want. The only thing they really have to do here is start to submit those proofs to our aggregator layer. And so it can kind of start to feel like this is almost a feature or a module that we can build into the Cosmos SDK directly. And that's kind of what we need your help with, right? Is we want to work with the Cosmos community and work with open-minded builders to try to do things to bring Ethereum liquidity into Cosmos and vice versa. Because we really think that there's a lot of value in the Cosmos values. We think customizability is important. We think diversity is important. This is so early in the industry. We shouldn't be limiting ourselves to a bunch of copy-paste EVM chains, right? We really should be playing around with interesting things and innovations. Because we kind of see ourselves as playing the role of AWS in the decentralized compute world. We want to provide this sort of infrastructure to make it cheap, to run at economies of scale, to take the headache of, how do I bridge assets? What are my safety assumptions? To take all of that away from the developer and let them focus on their app chains. So we're working with Canto, and they're going to get access to ETH liquidity just by submitting proofs of their existing EVM blocks. It's pretty cool. We're also working with Celo. So we've announced, we posted on their governance forum, they were actually going to go with an optimistic approach. And then after seeing our ZK architecture, they were like, hang on a second. This is a lot better for my user because it's faster, it's safer, it's clearly going to, as we go forward, prover software is only going to get more efficient, right? And so you kind of want to be betting on ZK as a tech, as a piece of the future tech that allows our industry to scale. So we're working with Celo, and basically our broad vision is to allow everybody to get access to any part of Ethereum that they want. So if they want to settle to Ethereum as a layer 2, they can do that. If they want to have consensus in their own sort of module and just use this as like a way to access liquidity, they can do that. But we need your help. We need your help to help us drive this forward. We need to figure out what kinds of features should we be prioritizing, right? How do we work with the Cosmos SDK to make sure that things are getting integrated smoothly? Should we be working on WASM provers? Should we stick to the EVM? How do we want to integrate with IBC? Which chains should serve as sort of like liquidity touch points? Do we want every chain to be submitting proofs to Ethereum? Or do we want to just have like 1 or 2 that sort of serve as gateways? What level of trust assumptions do people require, right? So broadly speaking, that's all I have to say. Thank you so much.